So, as all of you know, the history of aviation started with fixed-wing airplanes. In 1903, the Wright brothers performed the first successful flight, motorized flight, with their airplane. The general idea of an airplane is that you have a special shape of the wing that produces a lift when you move forward at a high speed. And in this way, the plane gets tilted or gets lifted, experiences a lift, and you can control the attitude of the plane by flaps that are installed in the wings, but also at the rear end of the plane. And planes are very successful and aerodynamically well understood. Probably everybody of you will have already flown with an airplane. It's relatively fuel efficient, but one significant problem there is that you always need a runway to achieve the speed that is high enough to actually take off. And similarly for landing, you also need a runway. You can't just land somewhere where you want. Another problem also is that you can't stop in the middle of the air. You can't just stay at a certain position. You always have to move forward to be sure that you have enough, that your wings generate enough lift. This is then what motivated people to look for or develop so-called vertical takeoff and landing devices. And interestingly, the first such vehicle was built in 1924, 10 years before the helicopter, and this first device actually was a quadrotor. The problem, however, with a quadrotor is that if you don't have any electronic control, then it's extremely hard to stabilize the flight of this. You can imagine this as you have 4 different joysticks then that you have to control all by yourself, and that makes it of course very hard then to fly in a purposeful way and not to crash. Therefore quadrotors were not very successful at that time, and then as I said, roughly 10 years later in 1936 the first helicopter had its first successful flight. The idea there is that instead of having 4 rotors that are hard to control, you just have one main rotor in the middle, and by a very intelligent or very smart mechanical construction, this rotor can adjust the pitch of the propeller depending on the current orientation or the current rotation angle of this main rotor, and that leads then to different thrust in different regions around the helicopter, and with that you can control the pitch and roll. And with this design, it becomes possible to navigate manually. Of course, you still need a skilled human pilot, but this can be done so only a single person can do that. One problem obviously is that, and you remember that from the previous video, that if you have only a single rotor, then this induces a torque on your vehicle. So if you wouldn't do anything else, you would start turning around your own axis. And this is why a helicopter has a second tail rotor that then compensates for this torque. The good thing about helicopters is that they are easy to fly by a pilot, but the disadvantage is that you need this mechanically relatively complicated swash plate in the middle, and also the rotor blades are relatively large, and that makes it relatively dangerous when you come close to buildings, for example, because if you touch something, then then you'll probably crash.